Welcome to the Speculative Fiction Writing Made Simple podcast, and to my twice-a-month segment, Ask Me Anything Thursday, where I answer a writing question in 10 minutes or less. Well, probably 10 minutes or less. We'll see how it goes. Today's question is from fantasy writer Becca. She asks, can I write a dual point of view novel using a mixed POV structure? For instance, could I write one protagonist in first person and the other protagonist in third person? Before we dive into Becca's really important question, let's make sure we're all on the same page. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you've probably heard me use the term POV in a bunch of different ways. But for this episode, we're talking about it in its most traditional sense. How your story is narrated and which pronouns are used to tell it. So, for a quick refresher, first-person POV is when the narrator is inside the story, telling it from their own perspective. You'll use the pronouns I and me in this point of view. For instance, you'll say, I walked into the room, I held my breath. First person is especially popular in YA novels right now because it creates an immediate and deep connection to the protagonist, which is something that teen readers absolutely love. And because we see so many of these YA novels have such huge crossover appeal, we know that adult readers actually really love this POV as well. The second person POV is when your narrator speaks directly to the reader using the pronouns you and your. For example, you walked into the room, you feel your pulse quicken. This POV is actually quite rare, but when it does show up, it's usually in upmarket speculative fiction or in super quirky experimental stories with a strong voicey style. The third person POV is the classic storytelling approach, and you will be using the pronouns he, she, or they. For example, she walked into the room, he wasn't ready. This is, of course, the most common POV across all genres and age categories, including speculative fiction. All right, now that we've got that all sorted out and we're all on the same page, let's dive back into Becca's question. So, as a reminder, her question was, can I write a dual POV novel using different points of view? For example, one protagonist being written in first person and the other being written in third. The short answer is yes, absolutely you can. Now, if we're talking trends, it is certainly more common for a dual POV novel to stick to the same style throughout. For example, both protagonists being written in the first person or both being written in the third. That's just what we tend to see happen most often, but that doesn't mean you can't mix it up. In fact, if switching POVs between first and third or second and third or second and first serves your story, you should totally do it. This mixed POV style has actually been done successfully in quite a few speculative fiction novels. A couple of great examples are The 10,000 Doors of January by Alexei Harrow, which switches back and forth between first person in the main timeline and third person in an alternate timeline. It's also been done very successfully in The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. In that book, Jemisin switches back and forth between third person and second person. And if you haven't read it, I would highly suggest you go do so if you have any desire to use the second person POV, because she does it brilliantly and you can certainly study her novel. On a personal note, because I want to keep it real and let you know what I'm working on as well, I'm actually using this technique in my own dystopian fantasy novel right now. One of my protagonists is written in the first person and the other is written in the third. And you know what? It is working. It fits my vision for the story and it's doing exactly what I need it to do. So if mixing POVs makes your novel stronger, go for it. The key is to make sure that the choice feels intentional and that it helps shape the story, strengthens the character voices, and ultimately creates the best reading experience for your audience and the best writing experience for you. Once you've chosen the POV that excites you the most and feels right for your story, I have a few quick pieces of advice that will help you pull it off smoothly. Number 1, if you're using the first person POV, make it your primary protagonist's POV. What do I mean by this? Well, in most dual POV stories, one character tends to be the real protagonist, the one we're meant to connect with the most. And since first person is such an intimate and immersive POV, it's usually best to reserve it for that character. Why? Because it naturally pulls the reader, and you, the writer, deeper into their perspective. So if one character's journey is central to the emotional core of the story, that's definitely the one that should be in first person. All right, number 2, make sure that each protagonist has a distinct voice. This is especially important when you're switching POVs. You don't have to overdo it. There's no need to make one character sound like a Shakespearean poet and the other like a modern-day teenager. But their thought patterns, sentence structures, and internal monologues should feel unique between POVs. Readers should be able to tell whose head they're in, even if you didn't directly tell them. Number 3, use clear transitions between POV shifts. Smooth transitions are key to keeping your reader grounded. The best way to do this? Use chapter breaks to signal the change. Jumping abruptly between first and third person, mid-paragraph, or mid-scene is just a recipe for confusion. Instead, establish a clear pattern early on and make it super simple for the reader to understand. Again, I highly suggest letting each protagonist get their own chapter. That way it's abundantly clear whose head we're in. Number 4, use a deep POV to draw readers in. No matter which POV you're writing in, first, second, third, either way, you should be using a deep perspective, which means we are fully inside the protagonist's head, experiencing their thoughts and their emotions directly. It makes for a much stronger reading experience, and it really does work whether you're in first person or second person or third person. And the best thing is, it keeps readers immersed and emotionally engaged. Number 5, last but not least, study novels that use a mixed POV structure. That's right. If you are going to use a technique in your novel, I always suggest going out there and reading novels where the author has done that technique. In fact, whenever I'm trying something new in my own writing, that's the first thing I do. I always look at examples of authors who've pulled it off really well. And when you're studying this technique, pay attention to how the author transitions between POVs, how they establish the character's inner voice, and what makes it all work. Again, there is no better teacher than other authors who have done something well. All right, my friends, that's it for today. I hope this was helpful to you. Thanks again for joining me today on Ask Me Anything Thursday. I hope this helps you make some choices around what POV you want to use in your novel. And if you haven't done so already, please take a moment to go into the show notes and sign up for my email list. Not only do I give valuable writing advice every single week, but I also do several free workshops each year for the rad group of writers that are on my email list. And you really don't want to miss that. So go find the link in my show notes right now and sign up for that. All right, until next time, keep writing, keep dreaming, and remember, the world needs your stories right now more than ever. So don't you dare give up on your novel or yourself. Talk soon.